Hey folks, today trying something a little different here. Going to do a little video with the podcast and see how things work. I'm really curious to hear your feedback, so don't hesitate to let me know what you think. I definitely want to make sure that I'm communicating with you the topics in the best way possible. And so trying a different format just to see how that works. So if you're just listening to the audio today, definitely head over to the YouTube channel and definitely let me know what you think. Okay? So today's topic is something near and dear to my heart, especially in the winter. It's something that we engage with all the time when we do our out-season training, which is effectively working on a very fixed schedule with an opportunity to reduce the volume and do a higher amount of work with a higher amount of recovery. It's a topic that you'll see posed in different areas and usually outside of the space of endurance sports, because endurance sports really gets focused on specific things, right? And so the topic that I'm going to talk to you, guys about today, I want to make sure that you capture it, okay? Is called minimum effective dose, okay? Just like this. And when we think about minimum effective dose, or what we'll refer to as MED today, when we think about the MED, a lot of times it comes down to thinking about medicine, right? So we think about prescribing medicine or having a prescription. We want just a minimal amount of, whatever the medicine may be, painkiller, etc., that's going to yield the desired outcome that we want without having all the negative consequences associated with too much, right? And we've all had some experience with either pain recovery drugs or something similar, maybe post-surgery or whatever it is. It just kind of makes you feel off and not right? So we think about minimum effective dose as a very deliberate and strategic tool to make sure that people are doing their best to stay healthy and manage their lives, right? Similarly, we think about minimum effective dose in lots of other areas of our lives, right? So, for me, an easy minimum effective dose that I want to make the most of is like my yard, right? So I love my yard. I want to work on my yard. I want my yard to look awesome, but I don't want to be out there every single day. I'm not a professional landscaper. I'm not going to be pulling out weeds by hand using tweezers. I want to do the minimum effective dose. I want my yard to look as good as it can, but I want to do as little work as possible. The challenge with minimum effective dose when it comes to endurance sports is that we have all sorts of cues and contexts that tell us, that minimum effective dose may or may not be the best way to go forward, right? So we think about all the numbers associated with our sports, right? We think about Ironman, we think about 140.6, right? We think about marathons, we think about 26.2. We think about people doing epic stuff. They're doing, Leadville, or they're doing 100-mile runs, right? It's not an epic adventure or an epic something, unless it doesn't have like some kind of like mountain range associated with it, some sort of insane effort that's forcing us to go hard, right? So this could very well be like the bumper sticker of your best friend's car and what the bumper looks like. But what it really means is that we're obsessed with these big numbers. The challenge becomes that when you have big numbers like this as the outcomes, we don't really think about all the pieces that go into the puzzle, right? And all of this work here is undergirded by training. And this training is effectively what we're engaged in from now at the start of your season, right? So we're going to call this winter inside Endurance Nation, and all the way through to the end, whether that's, spring. I'm just going to call it summer for argument's sake. And so across the course of this 9-month block here, we've got to figure out what we're going to do to be able to hit these high numbers. And while most athletes understand the concept that they don't go out on day one and do a marathon or do an Ironman, in the back of their minds, what they're really thinking about is, how can I be the best I can be? And the challenge comes with understanding what daily actions are related to your outcomes. And having that conversation with athletes is a huge part of what we do inside Endurance Nation. And we start right now in the winter months. So when we think about minimum effective dose, what we're trying to do is come up with an understanding of what amount of work yields the best results for you and for your training, okay? And so when we think about our training, in today's lesson, I'm going to talk a little about running because it's super easy in terms of breaking things down. So traditional training programs, say if we're going to go back to this marathon block over here, it has different elements of training, right? So you're going to have a period of time in here where you're doing all of your preparation work and you're trying to get ready, right? You're going to have a period of time in here where we're going to do our specificity work, right? So we're going to do something we're going to be really sort of dialed in, right, on something very, very specific, right? And then we have a final period of time here where we start thinking about what it means to make that rocket ship, right? So we're going to take off to the stars, and we're going to be race prep, and then we have our race, and we're good, right? So we've got sort of 3 generic phases as we go. All through those phases, we're balancing fatigue, we're balancing stress, we're balancing all these different elements on our system. So what does it mean for us to be able to be successful in the context of this block? Well, everyone thinks about this last block. Everyone thinks about what did they do before they got to their last race. So their mind, when they think about what this block means, actually spends the vast majority of the time they remember all being about that race period of time, right? They think about all this race period of time. They don't realize that from a reality perspective, they spent more time doing the stuff that got them ready for that race period of time. More importantly, there's good trends and good training that happens in this earlier part of the season when we're not obsessed with numbers, when we're not obsessed with speed, and instead we're focused on the inputs and managing things effectively. So when runners think about that big block, typically that's associated with numbers, right? And so it'll be some kind of like weekly mileage, right? That's an easy one to do. Another number that really comes up a lot is long run pace. These 2 elements here are my biggest nightmares as a coach, simply because people will chase targets simply because those targets are there, right? If you and I are running and someone puts a sign down the road there, one of us is going to want to race to that sign, whether it's subconscious, conscious, part of the workout, not part of the workout. It's just natural. Put a hill in front of us, someone's going to want to be first to the top of that hill. Weekly mileage numbers, someone's going to want to hit that number, even if it's completely arbitrary and has nothing to do with your goal, right? Similarly, long run pace. Athletes will consistently benchmark themselves against that weekend long run. Last week I did 15 miles and I did it at this pace. This week I want to do 15, 14, 16, 18, whatever it is, but I want to do it at a pace that's faster than last week's pace. If I'm not going further or I'm not going faster, then I'm not getting better is the conversation that athletes are having with themselves. And that couldn't be further than the truth. So I want to switch gears for a second and talk a little bit about what minimum effective dose means for runners. I'll throw it here on the other side of the board so you get a sense of where things are. And I apologize, I am left-handed, so maybe a little challenging for you to kind of see that. So when I think about what minimum effective dose for runners gets into, the number one thing that we talk about inside Endurance Nation is frequency, okay? So there's lots of different ways that you can break down your 40 miles over the course of the week. So if we just assume that 40 miles is the goal, there's lots of different ways we can get to 40, right? We can do 4 by 10, right? So run fewer times, run longer, we still get our 40 miles a week, right? Okay. You know, another option to do is to kind of break that down. The traditional way would be, say we got our long run on the weekend of 15, which leaves us with 25 miles. And so we might go 5 by 5 plus my 15. So in that case, we've got sort of a standard weekly model, and then we've got this longer run on the weekend. This is getting better. This is getting closer to what I'm looking for, which is a greater distribution of runs. In this model, we've got 4 runs. In this model, I've got 6 runs. And the more frequent those runs become, the more often you're running, the better off we are. And I'll get more into that in a second. So another option here will be to say something like 5 by 8. In that case, we're back to 5-mile runs, but we don't have the outlier of that big run. This would be something, a 5 by 8 would be something that we would do early in the season as we're getting our preparation in place. The 15 with the 5 by 5, that would come later in the season when we're getting more race specific. So choosing your frequency maps with the time of year as we're moving across the course of the year. The reason why frequency is so important is that when we look at any given run, so runs, athletes like bar charts, right? So if we have a run, and this is the total duration of your run, there's different elements of work that happen across the duration of your run. And for me, the most important duration of work, we have sort of the warm-up in the beginning. Then we have that middle section where things kind of get a little hard, right? And then we have that last section where this is where the fitness happens. Everyone's focused on this, right? How fast am I running at the end? Am I negative splitting? What does that look like? But for me, actually, this beginning section of your run, the foundational start to your run, before you even start sweating, you have that onset of sweating, this is the biggest part of me for the run because this is where you are engaged with your run. This is the transition time from you as person at home to you as runner. And that transitional time is full of heightened awareness in terms of technique, form, mindfulness, posture, cadence, all those elements, all eyes are on this section. As we start to move into more work mode, our body naturally shifts from focusing internally on all the sort of elements about what it takes to run and focusing more specifically on energy systems. And then finally, at the end, it's more of a push and pull battle between outcomes in terms of pace or distance and your ability to sustain that work. And that mental piece is very different. When we get to that piece, sure, that's a great fitness problem to solve, but I want more of this. I want more of this first 10 to 15 minutes of your run. And it's only 10 to 15 minutes a run. Let's call it 10 minutes right now. Well, if you've only got 4 runs in a week, at 10 minutes of that mindfulness time, I'm only getting 40 minutes of that time. If we're getting 5 or 6 runs, I'm getting 50 or 60. 1.5 times as much as we can get out of that, right? So for me, I think a lot more about this piece. And if we follow the logic from the value of these first 10 minutes, and we can increase the number of 10 minutes we have, well, then you can get really creative. Because you could take that 15-mile run on the weekend, and you could split it up. You could do 10 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. And we've doubled 20 minutes, that mindfulness time, in that same 15 miles. And we've gotten the same relative fitness impact that we want, but we've increased that early speed time for us, right? So for me, when I think about minimum effective dose, I'm not saying train less, do less work, and we'll still be super fast. I still want to leverage the quality that we get out of each session by having you focus on that interim early run. So for runners, minimum effective dose is based around frequency, and it's based on tapping into this early mindfulness piece. So when I think about 5 by 5 or 5 by 8 is sort of the running piece, for me, when I think about a marathoner and a runner, I would go back and look at last year's training volume and understand roughly where you were at this time last year, and I would set a baseline goal. So the more serious you are, the more often you run. So if you've got a high level goal, if you're a 50 miles per week or higher runner, 7 days of running a week is your target. Consistent, easy runs, not hard runs, etc., but those 7 days of run. If you're in the intermediate space, you're looking at 5, maybe 6 runs, and beginners should look at 4 to 5. Anybody can run a mile, and we want that frequency element. So frequency is that number one element of the minimum effective dose that we want. And that goes for all sports, but we get into frequency there. The more often you can engage in your sport, the better off that you'll be. So early in the season, when we're talking over here about with this foundational work, which we're doing in the winter, this is a great time to have a conversation about minimum effective dose and locking in that frequency of runs and short, frequent runs. So for marathoners, just as an example, I'll put this out there, or even for long course triathletes as well, we could say, depending on where you are, whether you're advanced, you're intermediate, or you're beginner, we could say that advanced runners, like I mentioned, want to go 7 times a week, intermediate are 5 to 6, and then the beginners are 4 to 5 as you get into it, okay? We think about those numbers in terms of total weekly mileage associated with it. I'm happy with about 30 miles here to 35. The intermediate here, I'm going to say 25 to 30, and the beginner can be about 20 miles per week, spaced out 5 4-mile runs, for example, 4 4-mile runs. These numbers are almost half of what you would normally do in season, but that's fine. I expect you to fill that extra time with cross-training and other elements of your program. But more importantly, what I'm looking for as your coach is I want you to dial back this time, focus on the quality of your training and the frequency element of it. And then we start to take a look, because now all of a sudden I've got an ability to juxtapose high volume, high fatigue training with that low volume, high mindfulness, minimum effective dose training. And we're going to take a look at some numbers. And when we do benchmarking tests for runners, is typically for us is something like a 5K. Normally I would say something like go find a half marathon, but right now with COVID, not so many half marathons. But you can go ahead and say, where am I in related to this number in terms of fitness wise? How are we stacking up? And more often than not, for a coach, and for those coaches of you out there or people who work with athletes, this is an opportunity for us to really dive in and show athletes that they can still be strong and still be fast without doing all the associated work with those outcomes that they're consistently focused on. And we have a better conversation about inputs as well. Thanks, folks. I hope you enjoyed this conversation about minimum effective dose. I hope you can make the most of it this winter, whether it's with you or with your athletes. If you've got questions, comments, feedback, definitely leave them in the comments here, whether it's in the podcast or in the video. We'll go from there. All right, folks. Take care. Have a fantastic week. I'll be back soon with another lesson.